We'd like to talk about the Homeless Bill of Rights. So Karen, Paul, come on up and do your thing.
Do our thing. Well, first I'd like to get your membership dues right now. I'd like to collect them right this minute.
I'll collect.
Good.
I got you.
So, hi everybody. My name is Paul Bowden. I actually came up through the Tenderloin here at Hospitality House back in the early 80s, actually 1983, when the city started its homeless program. I'm currently the organizing director for what we refer to as the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Several groups throughout the West Coast banded together to try to make a bigger impact instead of fighting out issues of homelessness as a local or a Haight Ashbury or a Tenderloin or a Mission neighborhood issue, but really try to connect the affordable housing cuts in the late 70s and the early 80s, the absolute demolition and destruction of project-based Section 8 and public housing funding, and the dismantling of any kind of safety net for disabled people and for unemployed people, and connect that to the fact that so many of us are now finding ourselves out in the street. And the reaction to that has increasingly been to try to make us disappear. I can go back to when Agnell swept the Panhandle, and that was going to end homelessness in the Haight. And then Jordan and Willie Brown behind him. Willie Brown was going to get the helicopters from Oakland with the infrared stuff, and he was going to get rid of all the homeless people in Golden Gate Park, and that was going to eliminate homelessness in the Haight. Gavin Newsom does Sit Lie, and that's going to eliminate homelessness in the Haight. We're not going to eliminate homelessness anywhere until we get to the cause of why in the early 80s we saw a re-emergence of contemporary homelessness in the United States. Back in the 30s, and WRAP, the Western Region Advocacy Project, has a pretty hot shit website with artwork from the 30s era through today, documenting and really extensive documentation. But back in 1937, when we created what is now HUD, Housing and Urban Development, it said literally in the law that every citizen had a right to a safe, sanitary, and affordable place to live. And that was the role of the federal government. In 1998, when Gingrich and Clinton did welfare reform, a quality work assistance or quality work assurance program, I know I didn't say that right, but we called it the Contract on America. The Republicans called it the Contract with America, and Clinton called it expeditious to sign the shit. But when that passed in 1998, the entry into what is our federal policy on affordable housing was changed to the federal government cannot be expected to supply housing for all or even a majority of its citizens. So clearly you saw a pattern and a practice of saying, this is no longer our responsibility, folks. This is a commodity, and it's up to the private market to deal with it. And we might do a little bit of this low-income housing tax credit stuff so that some people make a profit off of it, and we supply some affordable housing to 80% of median income, but the insurance, the guarantee, the responsibility that the United States government is going to fund affordable housing for people in this country is no longer even on the books. So of course it's not in the political debate. Of course it's not in the political dialogue or in the campaigns. It's not even in legislation anymore. And the response that we have seen, those of us that come up from the streets, I was homeless as a kid for 6 years, and that what we have seen is, well, we can't deal with it no more, so let's just get rid of it. And let's just make it disappear. And we went out, we talked to over 800 people, now it's over 1,500 people, and we have the fact sheets and we have the documentation about what are your experiences with the cops. Of the 815 that right now we have gone through and documented each response, 80% have been busted, harassed, or cited, meaning given a ticket, for sleeping. 76% for loitering, 74% for sitting on a sidewalk. So when we saw the Sit Lie campaign, when you see all the stuff about quality of life laws and aggressive panhandling and urination and defecation, the offenses that people are being charged with by the police department is sleeping, standing, and sitting. What's left? Walk. That's it. As soon as you stop walking, if you're homeless, and I'm not just talking Haight Street, I'm talking throughout the United States and certainly throughout the state of California, as soon as you become an annoyance or enough phone calls have come into the captain's office so the captain wants to make everybody disappear for a while so that therefore we don't see him and the heat comes off. Or I remember Dianne Feinstein making a phone call to Newsom's office because she saw somebody when she was driving on Van Ness, and all of a sudden the people on Van Ness Street were gone. Any of that kind of pressure comes in, or an event is coming to town, people, human beings, are being made to disappear by our police department and by these private security, business improvement districts and their private security offices. And so we went and all of these stats or whatever I'm giving you, they are stats. I left some sheets there, but they're all on our website. But we went and looked back because it seemed really familiar to us and for those of us that have been doing it for a while. And when you look at anti-Okie laws, when you look at sundown towns, the great creators of what were labeled ugly laws for years was San Francisco in 1867. And it was an anti-panhandling law against disabled people. And the actual language is in our fact sheet. And it says if you are maimed, mutilated, or unsightly so as to be deemed objectionable, your presence is illegal. How is that different from quality of life laws? How is it not a sundown town when you're telling people that the act of sleeping, standing, and sitting are illegal? Now, can we all think of somebody who happened to be homeless who was an asshole or a jerk or whatever? Yeah, I can also point to homeowners that I think have been assholes and jerks. That's not the point. That doesn't make the presence of every homeowner illegal. And we all feel under attack. We're just being attacked from different places. The homeowners are feeling under attack because the prices are going up and they can't afford it and whatever. The business owners are feeling under attack because of whatever pressures they're under. And the homeless people are feeling under attack. But it's only the business owners and the homeowners that have the police department and the business improvement districts backing up their play. And it's the homeless people that end up at 850 Bryant or out in San Bruno. And to the point that our 4 largest residential mental health facilities in the United States today are all jails. And I've been saying that statistic for a while, and it used to be 3. And now it's 4. And it's the LA County Jail #1. 3,000 indigent mentally ill people a night sleep in the Los Angeles County Jail. Cook County Jail is #2. That's Chicago. Rikers Island is #3. That's New York City. And now, to their great shame, I would hope, Houston, Texas has overtaken what was the largest actual residential hospital and is the 4th largest residential mental health facility in the United States. And these are all local jails, which means the people are in there for local chump change offenses. And so we looked at this and we talked about it and we thought about it and we said, I wonder if the people in the middle of the Jim Crow crap or the anti-Okie stuff or the sundown town stuff or the ugly law stuff, I wonder if they realized that years later they were going to be looked back at as a disgusting thing that we would never do again. Because it sure seems like every 30 or 40 years we do it again. We give it a different label, but we use the same laws. We use the same process of local enforcement, the homogeny or homogeny, I can't ever say it, but hegemony. Leland, the hegemony of local governance and local laws to say we don't want to deal with racism, so we're going to do Jim Crow. We don't want to deal with poverty, so we're going to do Antioquia. We don't want these Japanese people in our town, so we're going to do sundown towns. There's signs all over the country of towns saying, hey, Jap, don't let the sun set on you here. Or down in the south saying, hey, nigger, don't let the sun set on you here. This is a white man's town. And so they may have been more blatant, but what they're doing was they said it was illegal for you to stop, to sit, to loiter, or to be hanging around, or to be present in our community. And what we're doing today is we're doing the same thing. We've just got a different target population. And so this law, we came to Ammiano, and you know, thank God for Tom Ammiano. And he's feeling some heat for it, as people saw the Chronicle or the Fresno Bee or the Sacramento Bee or the LA Times or any of the other newspapers, where suddenly the fact that we're talking about creating an environment where let's deal with the facts of what created homelessness as opposed to criminalizing homeless people is seen as urination and defecation all throughout the streets of America, or California in these guys' case. There's a lot more to homelessness than urination and defecation. And there's a lot more to this bill. Homeless people didn't come to us and say, man, we want to do this stuff out in the public. We want to go to the bathroom between cars or in doorways. So we have hygiene centers. You know, we want to just be able to do whatever we want. No, they wanted defense, legal defense. If people think that everybody has a right to legal defense when they're in the criminal justice system, you're wrong. When you get these tickets, you have no right to any legal defense. When you don't pay the ticket or show up in the belly of the beast in the court system and fight it on your own with no legal defense, when you do that, it becomes a bench warrant. Now you have a right to legal defense, but only on the fact that you got a bench warrant, not on the crime you were charged with to begin with. That is patently unfair. That is having laws in our community, criminalizing the presence of people, having them in jail. A dude just spent 30 days in jail to get a trial date where the judge threatened him, so he copped a plea. He got a year stay-away order from the Tenderloin for sitting on a crate on McAllister Street, and then he had a second offense on Turk Street. And there was nothing else in the charges against him except the cops were pissed off that he was sitting on the milk crate and didn't move fast enough.
Oh, man.
And he literally demanded a trial, and for that he was going to do 3 years if he had been found guilty, so he copped a plea. That is not legal defense. That is not criminal justice. That is using the power of the cops, using the power of intimidation, using the power of the courts to say to that man, you might think the Tenderloin is your community, but because you don't got a home, we don't see it that way. And we think the way we're going to gentrify and get Scott Wiener all freaking happy or whatever the hell he's trying to do, the way that we're going to accomplish the goal of making every neighborhood in San Francisco look like freaking Disneyland is we're going to get rid of you guys. And if you go to the website of New Cities America, it's called, which does the business improvement districts and promotes them and has this organization called Block by Block that provides all their security throughout the United States. It says to create the shopping mall environment in downtown corridors. We are those downtown corridors. And the homeless people amongst us and in our community are a hindrance to creating that shopping environment that they're trying to accomplish. And one day, people are going to look back at the quality of life laws today, and they're going to be talking about us in the same breath that they talk about sundown towns and Antioquia laws and ugly laws, unless we all turn around and say, you might have done that in the past, but you ain't doing it no more. So our law also builds in that not only does it stop doing it today, like they did with Jim Crow eventually, like they did with Antioquia eventually, like they did with sundown towns eventually, but damn it, we're not going to let you do this again. And the disparate impact on these kind of laws are going to be played out in the consideration of the enforcement of these laws so that they don't target people for their presence, for their income, for their housing status, for the color of their skin, but that so they really talk about, are you maliciously trying to manipulate, beat up, harass, intimidate people in our community? Because if you are, then that's between you and the criminal justice system. Are you being present and being a human being in our community? Then if you are, that's for the community, and we'll deal with it in a different arena. And that's the goal of what we're trying to achieve, and that's what we're trying to overcome is this local time, place, and manner restrictions that they talk about that are so disproportionately enforced. Everybody knows they're disproportionately enforced, but nobody has been able yet to stand up and challenge it. And our campaign is to say, we don't want to be the generation that was doing sundown towns, but we called it quality of life. And so we introduce this, we get it going, we build it up. It may take a while to pass it. This stuff ain't easy, but we're going to keep playing with it, we're going to keep pushing it, and we're going to keep going with it until we get it passed. And then Karen now will talk about the local impact of this.
Woo! You warmed that up for me. So my name's Karen, and I'm the program coordinator at Homeless Youth Alliance. Who's familiar with Homeless Youth Alliance? Okay. So we are right across the street from Goodwill. We are a homeless youth drop-in center. We serve folks 29 and under. We see anywhere from 60 to 120, 150 youth a day, and that's in a crunch of about 3 to 4 hours. So we provide basic services, basic needs, so showers, food, clothing, a place to rest, bathrooms, basic hygiene supplies. But I think what's more important about what we provide is a safe space for people to get away from everything Paul just talked about. Our space was created by formerly homeless youth, and the people that work there were part of the population or have their own pretty relevant struggles that our population faces. Everyone that works there has to have that. And that's part of why we create a culturally humble, safe space for the participants that work there. Participants that come there. And just to talk a little bit about, are you guys familiar with the population we serve?
Go ahead and...
Yeah.
Well, I'm on I'm on Waller at Stanyon, and in the mornings it's just a sea of mostly young people with their dogs, just being chased out of the park. And then there's maybe people in their 20s, 30s with shopping carts full like a house. Just all of their possessions, maybe 3 carts full, setting up a house. And it's just so painful to see that. It's really shameful.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, the whole reason I started from there is because I came from a shattered family, and the show was the same over here. When I was on the road, it was one of the first places that opened up. So I'm glad they're here.
I think that some people have shopping carts to recycle. I've seen political ads that were trying to smear homeless people with showing them with shopping carts. But you look at if you look closely, they're recycling stuff out of garbage cans that would otherwise, and they're providing a free service that would otherwise not be provided. So really, when you see people with shopping carts and huge amounts of stuff, sometimes a lot of it's recycling stuff.
The kids are kicked out of their homes by their parents for one reason or another.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go back.
I heard the term runaway, and I appreciate that term, run out of their home. Another term that I haven't heard recently is throwaway.
Yes.
Which I think is extremely appropriate. The family was so dysfunctional for whatever reason, while alcohol and drugs is usually blamed for the dysfunction of the family. And frequently the family doesn't realize that they're dysfunctional, and
I'll agree.
Thank you very much. But there's other causes too, including mental illness. And I just, you know.
Well, and if I could interject, because, and I would ask people, and there's some sheets there with our website on it. After being homeless for 6 years and doing this for 30 years, the one common thread, and we can talk about mental illness, we can talk about education. My mom died of a cerebral hemorrhage. My dad was an asshole. I ended up out in the street for 6 years, coming from Long Island, New York. I did not know I was going to end up out in the street at 16 years old, right? I mean, anybody can talk about that. But back in the early 80s, the SRO hotel rooms in the Tenderloin matched the general assistance grant that you got on welfare. And so pretty much if you could hustle yourself onto general assistance, you could get a hotel room, or at least for the equivalent amount of money, which was like $140 a month, right? And what we found in looking at the overall, there's 3 million people. Like that's at least 2 million different reasons why we became homeless, right? We're not a monolith group, right? And what we found was that as the massive, I'm talking $54 billion a year equivalent in 2004 dollars, blah, blah, blah. But the massive, massive cuts to affordable housing and community development block grant funding directly correlated with the opening of the emergency shelter systems in 1982 and 1983. Like you couldn't look at any other statistic and say, wow, that matches ideally. So that's why we keep trying to, because mental illness, dysfunctional families, dads that were jerks, all that stuff existed prior to 1982.
Yeah.
Lord knows classism and racism existed prior to 1982. Like, what changed that all of a sudden millions of families and individuals ended up out in the street? And the one thing that we saw that changed it, in spite of all that other stuff, was the affordable housing funding, and then the way that local governments have tried to recruit or restore some of that funding has been a dismal failure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that a great deal. I understand that too, very much. And while you're giving the ideal time frame is very, very good. And cutting of the Affordable Housing Act and the money. What? The only thing that you left out, as far as I can see, is that had to be cut so Ronald Reagan could give the fat cats of this country a tax break.
Yeah.
That's why they were cut.
I think it was cut because we weren't strong enough to stop it from being cut, and that we need to organize or die. Like I think we need to recognize the fact that as we unite into a social justice movement and get out of being a homeless movement or an education movement or a gay rights movement or an anti-war movement, but when we unite into a social justice movement, we can be powerful enough to overcome that. I think we get what we are not strong enough to take.
I've been coming for the last year or so, but about every other month.
Rewind and talk a little bit about what this bill would look like for HYA and the population that we serve. Right on my way here, people were getting hustled and hassled for sit-lie, and they were just sitting outside of a store blasting music, just hanging out. And obviously that's not super helpful. And what this would look like, and some of the barriers to services that I think this bill would help with that are really significant is that a lot of our population, you guys already acknowledged a lot of runaways coming from abusive homes, experienced a lot of trauma. And I want to add what John was talking about. Not everybody on the street is like a super traumatized lost soul. A lot of people want to just pave their own path and try something different. I think we can all relate with that. But for those that have experienced a lot of trauma and are trying to figure things out, there are a lot of barriers to services. A lot of the folks who sleep in the park, shelters are overcrowded, are not safe. People do not feel comfortable sleeping there, and if they do, they can't really get a good night's sleep. There's a lot of drugs, and for our younger population, that is just not an option. And a lot of them have dogs because they're sleeping outside, and that's a safety and a companion thing, and dogs are not allowed in shelters. The housing units we do have available at HYA are in the Tenderloin. And so we have to be very careful and selective about who we allow to use that housing service, because the Tenderloin, you may come in and not come back out. So those are kind of some of the options that we do have. And I think this bill would greatly change that. It would really shift the dynamic. And I think not only will it shift specific service options, but it will shift the culture. It will acknowledge that there is a problem and that there is a community that we're not serving and we're not respecting and honoring. And this is going to shift that culture.
And we're in a debate with the Judiciary Committee in Sacramento about whether or not it's okay for the state of California to say to local governments, you can't criminalize their presence. And we call it life-sustaining activities, because whether I like it or not, when I was asked out in the street, at some point I went to sleep. At some point I stood still. And at some point I sat down. And if that's criminalized, then you're basically telling me you're a sundown town and I need to keep walking. And so we should at some point be able to say to local governments, dude, you can't do that no more. You can't do that.
So there are pretty large legal issues that have to be settled before the bill can proceed.
This bill's going to be a struggle. This bill's going to, luckily we got a 2-year session and we're going to probably need a really good chunk of it. Now, if Tom he did call me this morning and say there's no way he could make it because he was heading back to Sacramento this morning. And, you know, he's convinced it's going to be a 1-year bill, and that's great. I hope that's true, but not if it's watered down. Like, we want to make sure that we do this right rather than we just claim a victory and not change anything. And I don't mean that sarcastically, but that does happen with bills at times. You have to be on, you know. And so, like, I'll never forget as a poor person in the welfare reform, and the advocates were calling it a victory because welfare was only cut 12%. We won't do that. I would rather keep the struggle going and not change anything at all than to sit there and say it's a victory but people are still being criminalized. So, you know, we need to first buy into the concept that we agree this is a historical pattern. We agree it needs to change. We have a framework for how to change it. And then we need to build the political support to actually make that happen. And that's where at the very early stages of trying to do that.
What kind of a letter did you want Hank to write?
We have a form thing that's actually on our website also, or I can send. Colleen certainly has it. She was going to be here tonight. But it's just it's a letter on letterhead that says this organization supports this Bill of Rights and feels like it's time that we change this pattern.
Can she take that to the board then?
She can take it to your board if you guys tell her to, yeah.